Hello and welcome to Psychgeist, where we talk about the psychology of the era, the science of games. I am your host, Dr. Rachel Kowert, and on today's episode of Academic Ramblings, we're going to be talking about how to find a reliable source of information. I sign off every video saying cite your sources, but not all sources are created equal. So what makes a good source? For me, it's about the 4 A's. Is it accurate? Is it authoritative? Is it accessible? And does it answer your question? First, is it accurate? Is it up to date? Has it been peer reviewed? That is, has it undergone a review process where other people in the field read it and approve of its publication, like in peer-reviewed journals? Does it come from a source that's known to produce trustworthy content? Is it published from a journal with a good reputation? Or is the source coming from a website with a weird extension you've never heard of before? The accuracy of the information is critical for the reliability of the source. There are many ways you can test for accuracy. For instance, if your information comes from an academic journal, this would indicate that it is peer-reviewed and has been scanned for its accuracy by others in the field. Is it a news source? If it is, you need to make sure it's a news source that's known to present factual information. The website mediabiasfactcheck.com is a good place to start to check that. It not only gives a bias factor, which is less relevant here, but also tells you how factual their reporting tends to be. In my opinion, a good source would be one that is mostly factual or higher. Is it authoritative? That is this an article written by an expert or authority on the subject? Is it written by someone with credentials in the field, either through their education or through their work experience? If there is a byline, Google the author and see what their background is. If it's a person writing an article on biochemical engineering but has a background in clinical psychology, they may not be the most authoritative source for this topic. Is it accessible? By accessible, I mean the information you're looking for should be available from multiple sources that meet the criteria of accurate and authoritative. You should be able to find multiple sources for any particular piece of information that you are looking for. If there is a large asteroid headed for Earth, there's just not one single person on YouTube that's going to be talking about it. There are dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of amateur and professional astronomers that would also be reporting on it. Similarly, if you're looking for sources about the links between violent video gameplay and aggression, you should look for multiple sources of information. Read what they have to say and put all that information together to form your own opinion. It is best to not draw conclusions from a single source or a single perspective. Does it answer your question? Does it answer the question that you're asking? If you wanted to know which Final Fantasy is the best, 6, we've been over this, and you end up reading an article about how Balthier is really the Han Solo of Final Fantasy 12, while accurate, it doesn't really answer your question. Now, a source doesn't have to meet all of these conditions. For example, this article by Dan Golding about the end of gamers is one that I cite often. It does come from a personal blog, so it is not peer-reviewed, but it is written by someone of authority, and it does answer my questions about gamer social identity and the other things he talks about here. There are also multiple other articles that touch on these topics. So keeping these 4 A's in mind, accuracy, authoritative, accessible, and answering the question, let's briefly talk about different kinds of sources. Broadly speaking, we can break sources down into peer-reviewed and not peer-reviewed. I talked about peer-reviewed work earlier when I talked about accuracy. Now, a piece of work doesn't necessarily need to be peer-reviewed to be accurate, though it does lend some authority to the piece knowing it has undergone review from other experts in any particular field. Peer-reviewed pieces can come in many forms, but in scientific circles, it tends to be in the form of either a journal article or a book. Journal articles are short to long pieces in any particular area of study. They can be somewhere between 2,000 and about 12,000 words. It can be an overview of a single experiment. It can be an overview of a series of experiments. It could be a literature review, or it could be collations of research like meta-analyses. There are thousands of journals that publish these articles every year in every imaginable subject. For example, here are just some of the journals that publish in game studies. If you are looking for a particular piece of research and you want to search if something has been published in a journal, Google Scholar is a fantastic resource. Google Scholar can be found at www.scholar.google.com, and you type in the bar what you are looking for and voila, results. This is a great place to start. Google Scholar will often also show you books and book chapters as well that meet the search term criteria. Academic journal articles and books undergo peer review and editorial reviews to assess their clarity of writing and accuracy in terms of the way they present their information. This is especially important for articles that outline experiments, as it provides another safeguard to potentially, ideally, mostly, prevent poor experimental design or data analysis from being published. Then there is non-peer-reviewed work, which again is not inherently worse, but definitely requires more effort to navigate the good from the bad from the really bad. First, there's a white paper. A white paper is a position piece usually published by an institution or an organization. For example, this white paper from Take This was published last year about the state of the video game industry. Take This is a nonprofit organization with a good reputation. You can see here on the byline, it was written by several authors. If you Google their names, you'll find Dr. B is a clinical psychologist, as is Dr. Hayes, Dr. Kowert, that's me, is a research psychologist, Dr. Dunlap, a clinical psychologist. So the source is accurate. It's a nonprofit organization with a good reputation. The authors seem to be authoritative. They have high levels of education in their respective fields that is related to the topic of the paper being presented here. This information is accessible. They draw a lot from the IGDA State of the Research Report, which is open source and freely available for the public to read, and it answers my questions if I was interested in learning more about the state of the video game industry. So this would be a good source. You also have industry-based research. This kind of work often has the advantage of multiple authors as well, so you can be sure that it went through many iterations of edits. That said, industry-based research is usually conducted and published with a particular purpose, either to draw attention to a particular problem that the organization is trying to solve or a particular agenda. This doesn't discredit the work, it's just worth keeping in mind when interpreting the results. I'm generally a fan of looking at the numbers, reading the results section, and drawing my own conclusions before I move on to read their particular interpretations. Then you have editorial pieces. This is where you find your news articles, which are somewhat peer-reviewed because they undergo a pitch process and an editing process. This is also where the accuracy of the source really comes into play. If this is something published by a large news outlet, let's say the New York Times, this paper has a good reputation. If you go on mediabiasfactcheck.com, you'll see it has a left-center bias, which, okay, noted. But the important thing here is that their factual reporting is high. So if you see a piece here, you can be fairly confident you are reading something that has undergone a level of editing or review and is most likely factual. This is in contrast to, say, something published from Zero Hedge, who I don't actually know who they are. I just searched on Media Bias Fact Checked at who has the lowest level of accuracy in their reporting. You see here, it is identified as pseudoscience with low levels of accuracy. They say, quote, they may publish unverifiable information that is not always supported by evidence. So if you read something here, it's probably best not to take it as a single source. Try and search and see if there are stories with similar information from more accurate sources, and if you can't find that, it's likely inaccurate information. Then there are opinion pieces. The same thing applies here as I said before. If the source is not peer-reviewed, you need to make sure it checks the other boxes. Is the site it's posted on, and is the author authoritative? Going back to the example of Dan Golding's article. I also want to make a side note about the collection of YouTube videos that is often presented as news, but truly are opinion pieces. It's important to make sure, look up the credentials about the people presenting this information. For example, a video posted by Jay Smalls in small town Texas talking about nuclear fission maybe could be reliable. Maybe Jay Smalls has a degree in nuclear fission. Can we find journal articles that support the claims that he's talking about in his video? No? Then maybe it's not the most accurate source. If you look at an opinion piece written by a journalist with a high reputation from a reliable source, you could approach it with a little less caution. Sources are important. Citing your sources is so very important, especially in this era when everyone can have a voice on their blog, on their Twitch stream, on their YouTube channel. I understand the irony here, but I have the student loans to support my authority on this subject. It's important to remember that not all sources are created equally, and ideally the information you're looking for can be found from multiple sources, and you should read multiple sources before making your own decision. If you like this video and you want to see more, please like and subscribe, and until next time, be excellent to each other and always cite your sources.